Hi, I'm Alice Baquie, and I'm here with Brad Beard to discuss Pilates for endurance athletes, and you're listening to the Physical Performance Show.
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beard. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Welcome to episode 299 of the Physical Performance Show, brought to you by Polar's world-leading GPS watches and heart rate monitors, and their brand new multi-sport watches, the Vantage V2 in stunning Polar red, and the military-grade GridX Pro watch. I'm Brad Beard, sports physiotherapist and exercise scientist by trade and training, and founder of Pogo Physio. Each week, we'll bring you the latest and greatest information and inspiration designed to help you perform at your physical best. Of course, we do this across a range of our different episodes: interest editions, coaches' corners, learn-ins catch-up episodes, featured performers, and the expert editions. And hot off the back of last week's featured performer episode, where you heard from Australian dual Olympic finalist, 4 times national long jump champion and national record holder Brooke Stratton, we jump over this week to one of the team who, incidentally, assisted Brooke Stratton with her Olympic preparations. And you'll learn today from Melbourne-based physiotherapist and founder of AB Online Pilates, Alice Baquie, and get set to learn from Alice around the inclusion of Pilates for the endurance athlete into training programs. By way of bio, Alice is a practising physiotherapist with more than 10 years experience, herself a recreationally competitive distance runner, and the founder of AB Online Pilates. Alice works closely with some of Australia's leading track and field and distance running athletes, including prior featured guests of the show, Dave McNeill, last week's featured guest, Brooke Stratton, and recently Genevieve Gregson Nee LaCaze, off the back of her Achilles tendon rupture sustained at the Tokyo 2021 Olympic Games. And during today's expert edition, you'll hear Alice share around why it is that including some mat-based Pilates work into your training program can be so beneficial for both performance gains and with the quest to minimise injury incidents. Alice shares her top 3 must-do exercises for the running athlete, great tips on how to include mat-based Pilates into an already, no doubt, busy schedule, what to do regarding breathing, how Pilates can complement strength and conditioning programs in a gym facility, and of course, Alice issues a fantastic physical challenge for the week. So get set with your pen and paper for a topic that we are yet to explore across almost 300 episodes of the Physical Performance Show, and that is Pilates for the endurance athlete. Alice Baquie, welcome to the Physical Performance Show.
Thank you very much for having me. Really excited to be here. Big fan of your show so far, so I'm excited to be a part of it.
Well, Alice, you've been doing some great work for a long time, and particularly in this focused area around Pilates for endurance athletes, Pilates for runners. And it was some weeks ago when Jen Gregson Nee LaCaze was on the Gold Coast, and she was in the consulting room while she was on the Gold Coast post her Achilles rupture in Tokyo, and she mentioned she's got some great classes she was doing with you. And I know we'd connected over the years, and I'm like, we really need to get you on the show to take us through, if nothing else, what we can be doing when we're in a boot. Hopefully we don't all end up in boots with our lower limb running related injuries, but also to really explore this key topic of the inclusion of Pilates into runners programs / endurance athletes programs.
Absolutely. Delighted to be involved in Jen's an amazing journey so far. And I think as runners and any sort of endurance athlete, that is the sport we love, but also do all end up at some point or another with some sort of injury or niggle. So this has all come about because of that, to try and find that little stopgap between, low impact exercise that we can tap into to sort of do to prevent injury, but also when we are injured, something to fall back on that can keep us going and strong, so we can get back to training and not sort of get into that injury snowball again.
Yeah, and that's the holy grail for every athlete on the planet, right? And Alice, you've worked with a lot of the Australian athletics team athletes, some former guests of this show, Dave McNeill, Brooke Stratton, Isabeth Doyle, Hannah Bassick, Jemima Montag, Steve Solomon. So your contribution to their Olympic campaigns in 2021 was what? Was it with some online programming?
Yeah, so for most of those guys, actually there's a few of them, the endurance runners, so the likes of Sinead Diver and Dave McNeill and some of the other endurance athletes, they've been doing my Pilates for runners for quite some time prior to Tokyo. But there was quite a large selection of them that I got in touch with after Tokyo in that 2 weeks of quarantine, where that's sort of where it all came about for a lot of the athletes that sort of were stagnant for the first time in their lives in such a small period of time. And they'd sort of heard about this, all you need is a mat scenario, which of course in quarantine is all you've really got. And I thought, oh yeah, we're not doing too much, we'll give it a go. And it turns out a lot of them found it, first of all, quite challenging. And second of all, they sort of realised they're not used to not being very good at things. There's incredible athletes, but they did find that a lot of the moves they were doing quite challenging. They were getting those Pilates shakes, and they thought, well, this is an area that I've got to improve on. And being the classic driven people that they are, they thought, well, this is an area if I can keep going with, perhaps that's going to then increase, performance outcomes and that sort of thing as well. So I've had the pleasure of then having them in ongoing care after the Olympics. Yeah, I was delighted to have Sinead and Dave and a few of the other athletes prior, and they've been sort of getting on the mats. And when they travel around the world, as they do, not having facilities, and with COVID, gym access hasn't been super easy either. So, and it always is that risk, you go to a gym in a different country and, you don't want to expose yourself before a big competition. So being at home on your mat has been a safe option for them all. So they've been quite comfortable with it.
There's been plenty of great pics, Alice, of some of the athletes there up in Darwin or wherever they were quarantining post Tokyo here in Australia, doing your routines. So it's so COVID's been quite the eye opener for many athletes, and it doesn't seem to be going to ease up. Right, this is our new reality ongoing.
It is indeed, and people do often ask me that. They sort of say, "Oh, what are you going to do now that sort of things are opening up again?" And I think people have discovered that the fact that they only need a mat, they can do it 24/7 really around their training, around their travel. And it's still quite challenging. I think it's going to be something that ongoing, it's a really easy to maintain supplement to your training regime.
Alice, before we explore the what's and hows, your own journey into this area of expertise, I know you're a trained physiotherapist, but what led you into this, and what's the evolution been like?
Yeah, so I actually grew up a gymnast. And I think if I do look back on it, that is the sort of the crux of where this mat Pilates really rings home to me. From the tiniest little things, running around in leotards in the gymnasium, we were always told we had to do our activations, our warm-ups. We always did our cool-downs, our stretching routines, and they were obviously a little bit more gymnastics focused, but the principles of always doing something before you do your main session and doing something after your main session to sort of ease the body, it really just made sense. And I grew up without even thinking about it as you do. And then subsequently after gymnastics became a distance runner, which was the complete opposite of that. So you put your shoes on, you run, you finish, you get in the shower. And then you do that over and over again. And I think things have changed in the last decade, of course. There's more research, there's more people using the gyms, there's more people doing all sorts of cross-training. But I guess when I was doing my transition, it was going from a lot of conditioning to just running. And of course, subsequently, being a slightly more flexible person, being someone that was happy to go out and sort of hurt themselves a little bit, I did end up with a lot of different injuries. And it didn't make sense to me, the fact that I thought that I was resilient, but I guess there was that little bit missing in the running and the distance culture then, that I thought there's got to be something in this to stop us all from breaking all the time.
And you fine-tuned, you're online now with AB Online Pilates. Also, you're practicing through the week as well, or it's all full-time? I imagine it's a fairly heavy workload with all the online class options. You've got everything from foundation sessions, power Pilates, one-on-ones with yourself, Pilates for runners, wind down, which is not a, which is, I believe, with wine, and in rehab classes. So I imagine that's keeping your days very full.
Yeah, so it's sort of been an evolution. I came into physio and I gravitated straight towards Pilates because when you're a new grad, you come out and you're so overwhelmed by the world. I went straight into private practice, and then I thought movement, I'm really comfortable with movement. Someone comes in and I can just get them to move okay, and that makes me feel all of my other skills were, not up to scratch, I feel, and I had to work on them as you do. But when I could get someone on the floor moving, I was like, this is my thing. So that's where I felt comfortable. But I did obviously in the clinical world, as you know, in physios, we are very much channeled into reformers. They're the clinical rehab. They are something that is seen in the physiotherapy world as the gold standard of Pilates. And so for 9 years, I was hell-bent on reformer. You name the move, I've done it on a reformer, and I've had lots of different sort of styles in terms of, elderly sort of rehab. I've had some athletic work. I've had gen population, and I loved it, absolutely loved it. And then when COVID hit, I took myself kicking and screaming onto the mat because I thought, well, it's subpar, but I'll give it a go. And then over about a 6-month period of really just going full in Melbourne, we had nothing else to do. I tell you what, I was on this mat and that was my radius. And developed these moves and then started seeing some really good results, specifically with runners and endurance athletes on the weight-bearing functional work. And then I was hooked. And even if I was in a different environment where I wasn't so hands-on, I'd do some research on it because I can guarantee you now that the mat stuff for runners is where it's at. And I think then there was a community that built because we were all looking for something that would actually really hook us in. There was no schedule. Melbourne it still has been very grim. So in the Melbourne community in particular, we all sort of met on our mats. We'd have a bit of chat, we'd work out, we'd have challenges. And then next minute, there was just more and more and more on this platform. So I started pulling back more and more from my clinical hands-on treatment and more onto the Pilates, and it's evolved since then.
So it's been a busy 12, 24 months for you, Alice. And the benefits, some you've already touched on, but what would you say are the top 3 benefits we know the realities of endurance sports athletes, they're often time poor and energy balance can be often on the border of being under or being depleted.
Yeah.
What are the benefits firstly? And then we want to explore how would an athlete best include this as an extra, as an additional part of their weekly routine. So the benefits first, Alice, the top 3 benefits.
Top 3 benefits. So the first thing I think would be the very first benefit for the endurance athlete is that deep core strength and trunk stability. I think that's the first one, purely because I know that there is actually some decent research on that. So, and in fact, I can flick that across to you. But the one thing that I think that in distance runners do have is they do have a really good engine and they can tick themselves over. They are usually pretty gritty people, but in terms of that holding of function under fatigue is where we find the cracks start to form, not only in injury outcomes, but also in performance. I guess the sloppier you get, the more energy you expend and waste, and then the slower you get to the finish line sort of thing. So pelvic stability, trunk stability as a really good number one thing that I find with Pilates, that it just really gets all of the angles. The second thing I would say is strength endurance. And that's something that's quite specific to Pilates. I find that you can get, and I know that at the gym you go and you do your reps, you do your sets, you have a break and you do your next set. But these sessions of strength endurance really just flow. You don't get a break. You're going from your core to your glutes, to your quads, to your lumbar paravertebral muscles, into your shoulders. And I think that keeping that form under fatigue is a really nice replication towards the end of your run or event when you are starting to fail a little bit, but able to kind of keep that integrity. And then the third thing I would say is a really big component for these sessions, and it is joint mobility and range. And I don't mean that any runner has to be super flexible. And in fact, coming from someone that is more flexible, I would actually say you don't want to be overly flexible. You want that tissue stiffness to a degree. However, there is that balance, and I think you would know from your millions of years of treating these sort of athletes, is often they do end up with over-rigidity of, their ankle joints, their hips particular, and then they start to compensate with their movement patterns. So just adequate active mobility through range. Not so much as static stretches and that sort of thing, but working through hip flexion, hip extension, replicating the kind of ranges they need to get a good stride out, and doing it in a creative way on the mat, that they're not sort of standing there just pretending to run, but they're actually challenging themselves while they're doing it. They're having a bit of sweat, they're shaking a bit, they're trying to take on the next bit of information, and it does end up being a workout.
Yeah, brilliant top three there. Benefits, just to recap on those, Alice, I like that phrase, adequate active mobility. And we've both seen over the years as practitioners a shift away from the static stretches that were big in the 90s and definitely the 80s to more of this awareness of developing mobility through range. So certainly I think that's a brilliant benefit. Number two, the strength endurance. As you say, these positions, maneuvers, exercises, they flow, and it's a workout of endurance. And I like to sort of describe to runners, Alice, in practice, that there's three attributes they need from their muscles. One is that ability to generate the peak force, which they can get in a gym, right? Two is that endurance. They can develop that in a gym, but there's also that great ability to add on to that with things like Pilates on a mat. And then three, the ability to have reactive strength, so our plyometric type stuff. So that's great, the strength endurance. And the first one, I think, whenever we think of Pilates, we always think of this, right? And that's that ability for that trunk pelvic control as we run to ward off the fatigue. The better we do that, as you say, the lower likelihood of some subsequent injury and the better performance. Who doesn't want that?
Absolutely. Pun intended.
And then how does an athlete, a time-poor athlete, it's endurance in nature, hence there's a lot of training hours required, fatigue levels are often high. How do you overcome the obvious barrier that I just can't fit this in? I've got no room to fit anything else into my week.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point. And I mean, yeah, and especially with those that are, sure, they're training, they might have full-time work, they might have a couple of kids. I mean, when are you going to fit in this? It is a luxury to be able to do that extra training. Now, what I do think is works quite well for some of the athletes is the just little express sessions. So just peppering a few sessions of core throughout your week. And I often find the best way to do that is either just pre or post run. And I reckon that's the same with, you'll be the same with some of your physio exercises. So trying to get someone to do a separate regime in addition to their life is really difficult. But if you put it on at the end of a session, just like a little bit of dessert, if we want to sell it that way, tiny little bit at the end, then that's the way to incorporate it. And I think really, honestly, some of the runners that I've worked with that put 10 minutes of just some activation before they run, or just putting a 10-minute core sequence, your express core deluxe special, or however you want to call it, just at the end of your run when you are a little bit fatigued, you're already warmed up, and then you get in the shower and get on with your day, you will start to notice that that core work does start to infiltrate into your sessions.
I think everyone's saying amen to that. The idea of these, I think most endurance athletes have probably done something similar where it's got 5 minutes, something's better than nothing, right? Little training units.
Absolutely. And I guess the other thing is too, the beauty of these sessions is I'm obviously quite biased. However, you don't need to get a babysitter. You don't need to get in your car. You don't need to get home. You literally just have to have a mat. And often I see, which is really quite beautiful and it really makes my day, is people are with their kids. Their kids are rolling around the mat next to them. They might join in for a little bit. They've got their pets there. They've got dinner in the oven because they've multitasked it and they've given themselves 15 minutes for their potatoes to cook, and they're on their mat. And it should be lifestyle friendly. And I'm a big fan of that whole balance. It doesn't have to be, you see these beautiful ideals of these perfect gym setups, but that's definitely not life for a lot of people anyway.
And Alice, the other end of that continuum is if people can diarise a set block of time for a workout, what might that look like? So you've mentioned these express sessions as a way of overcoming the barrier of being time poor. We can do it while we cook our potatoes or boil our potatoes. What's on the other end of the continuum?
Yeah. So if I was going to paint an ideal world for if I had someone that was training for a half marathon coming in and, they've got 2 kids, they work part or full time, what would be their ideal gold standard in a training regime? My ideal for that person would be to do at least one full Pilates for runners, which is a 45-minute routine, which is a full body workout. There's really no muscle group left unturned. I'm quite meticulous about getting even the foot ankle stability as well as the back muscles, the core, the shoulders. Running is a full body sport. As much as runners hate doing their arms, they hate doing some of the stuff that they're not so good at, I still get it in there and I put the hard sell on them. I said, we've got to work on this Hamstring. We've got to work on this thoracic posture because, you know what, if we don't, you are going to notice that it'll infiltrate down the chain. So that would be the very first session to get in during the week. The second session would be ideally just a power session that they could pepper at the start or the end of a run, just as more a strength endurance and the research on Pilates for increasing performance and reduction of injury is always based on 2 sessions a week. So I do like to have twice a week if possible. And then if I'm going to go back to that dessert analogy, getting a wind down session in on a Sunday afternoon or whenever you can on the weekend, which is purely just active mobility and with sip breaks, I might add. Do people bring a beer, they bring a wine, we have sip breaks, we stretch, we make it casual, but it's quite enjoyable and you end up very zen, 50%. You do have the alcohol effect, but the other 50% is because that parasympathetic sort of outcome of stretching, active mobility through range sort of movements in a nice flow sequence. People find that, especially my distance runners find on a Sunday, it really kicks off their Monday and their training week on a nice note. So they'd be my 3 main sessions if you can. I've got some people, honestly, that do them every day. You know, they might be people without kids. They might have a bit more time on their hands. So the good thing about it is you don't tend to pull up as sore. And it's because it's not so much the eccentric load, I believe, in terms of the delayed onset of muscle soreness. The Pilates is very much the deep stabilizing burn as opposed to the global muscle burn. So therefore, what I think the athletes love is the fact that they can chuck a session in quite late at night and do their track workout the next day, but not be kind of feeling a bit toey on the fact that they've done too much in the way of load. So you still get that nice workout, but you're not impacting on what would be a key session.
Some great information there, Alice. With the runner who is already doing, or the endurance athlete already doing gym-based strength and conditioning and wanting to or needing to continue with that, would it be too much to be doing, say, 2 strength and conditioning workouts in a gym plus 2 designated Pilates workouts? Or would that athlete be better to do some of the express sessions like you mentioned, or both's fine, I guess? There's no magic formula here, right?
That's a really good point. And I actually do have quite a lot of my athletes that do have that strength component. And I'm actually a big fan of that. Like, strength training is great. I mean, especially if you are someone that's got a lot of tendon issues, if you've had a lot of bone stress injuries, you know, those sort of things are really going to be assisted by having that gym. And if you do have access to a gym and you've got those sessions in and you love doing them, definitely keep them going. And I would say the Pilates, in terms of on top of that, what I would probably approach it slightly differently, I'd probably say do one express session, which is just going to be a top up of all of the deep muscles that perhaps you haven't quite targeted in your more global strength session. And then the other session I always get those sort of guys to do is just what I call abs with AB, which is literally just a core workout, 30 minutes. And when I say core workout, people often think, oh, we're going to be doing crunches for 30 minutes. But I promise you, it's pelvic stability, it's trunk stability, it's your back muscles, your obliques, your deep stabilizers, your even your deep pelvic muscles, and that sort of thing. So, and that's something that at the gym I don't think you quite get as much. So I'd probably say a power session, which is just a little top up of all of the whole body, and then a core session, which is something you might miss a little bit at the gym. And then, of course, I am a big fan of the wind down. And I think that is actually one of my most popular sessions. I think that there might be different reasons for that. But yeah, as a nice, relaxing zen out time.
I think as most runners tend to be type A personalities, quite driven in nature, as you said, quite gritty at the start. A bit of zen in our lives can only be a good thing, with or without the alcohol, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And some people just bring a cuppa or, or whatever they feel like on the day. But I think it does have that quite nice social feel. And that is actually a class that I have started to do in real life, get a whole lot of people in the surf club coming down. We've got a guy on the bar doing cocktails. We've got our mats out and we're doing our mobility. So just before the Melbourne Marathon, we're going to be doing an event like that. But we're going to be doing it sensibly without booze, because it's going to be the day before the alcohol. It's going to be Gatorades and, that sort of thing, to kind of get people geared up, a little bit of active mobility for the race.
You're listening to Alice Baquie on this expert edition of the Physical Performance Show, episode 299. We are sneaking closer to that 300th episode. Support for today's show comes from Polar. If you are looking for a world-class GPS watch, then look no further than Polar. Polar are a sports technology company who build world-class GPS watches and heart rate monitors for people who take their health, fitness, and sports performance seriously. Polar have an incredible heritage. Headquartered in Finland, they have been the global driving force behind scientific wearables for over 40 years. They are the pioneers in and the world leaders in heart rate measurement technology. Their products offer athletes 24/7 monitoring to enable athletes to plan better, train smarter, and recover fully. So if it's time for a new GPS multi-sport watch, then head to polar.com to check out the incredible features like Polar Flow, Training Load Pro, run and bike tests so you can nail your VO2 max, and power training. And there's the nightly recharge and recovery load pro so you can absorb the best of your training and come back even stronger. And there's never been a better time to explore the world of Polar with the brand new military grade GridX Pro. Watch, the toughest watch out there, built from military grade sapphire glass with ultra long battery and new navigation tools, or my favorite, the new Vantage V2 in a stunning Polar red, one of the lightest multi-sport watches on the market. Now, as a bonus, the team at Polar are offering up to 15% off selected products. Jump over to polar.com and use the code TPPS on selected products. Support for today's show also comes from the Physical Performance Show's very own Learnings membership. It's simple. If you'd like to support the production of the show, you can do so from just $5 per month over at patreon.com, patreon.com. Now, in return for your support of the show, we'll grant you complimentary access to our back catalogue of live stream events, including Dr. Shona Halson, who shared around optimizing our athletic recovery, and Dr. Stephen Seiler, who shared around polarized training and why it matters. Most recently, UK-based sports dietitian and author Rinny McGregor presented a wonderful live stream fueling the endurance athlete. So as a supporter of the show over on patreon.com, we'll grant you access to those live stream events and, of course, our upcoming live streams. And a huge thank you to this week's new show patron, Johan Colin. Johan is an up-and-coming Australian triathlon talent hailing out of Canberra, Australia, training with JT Multisport, a wonderful triathlon community and squad led by James Thorpe. And Johan, I know you've been a long-term listener of the show, so thank you for your support. And finally, support for today's show also comes from Pogo Physio. We exist to help you get back to your physical best following injury. If you are an endurance athlete struggling with bone, tendon, or joint-related concerns, then our online 45-minute telehealth consultations can help get you back to your physical best. Jump over to pogophysio.com.au/telehealth. For now, let's jump back with this week's featured guest, Alice Baquie, on this expert edition Pilates for the endurance athlete. Alice, any nuances for the middle distance runner versus the distance runner? So track athletes versus road athletes. Any tips on Pilates practice for those two different groups of athletes you can think of?
Yeah, that's actually a really, really good point. So, and it's actually been really nice since Tokyo. I've had a lot more interest in the program. And for the first time, I guess naturally my background lends itself to a lot more of the endurance athlete. So anything sort of 5K up to sort of marathon, but having sort of come back, having been involved in the athlete's care since Tokyo, I've had some field athletes, some sprinters, some hurdlers, some 400-metre runners. And And I did actually have a good chat to Steve Solomon about this and the views on using Pilates for the more speed athletes, track, and then the views on using Pilates for the more endurance, marathon-based athletes. And he was actually quite good, and we did discuss this. And it comes down to performance outcomes for those guys at that elite level. And the stronger your trunk stability, the stronger your pelvis, the stronger your core, the better your ability to generate speed and power from that. So for them, it's a no-brainer in terms of trying to get strong deep, but then trying to get strong in the gym and then transferring that to power on the track. So for the slightly shorter distance guys, I mean, the gym is definitely something that they will always use in their programs to get that global power. But the difference about putting global power on top of a very unstable base of support, I mean, it's just like in any sort of architectural foundation, you've got to have that baseline there. So to be honest, I've actually been putting into place for them quite similarly what I would advise an endurance athlete with different performance outcomes, but the principles of that integrity of the trunk and stability of the core to then produce the performance outcomes on top of that is quite similar. The only thing is I have noticed, which is quite brilliant, is the fact that you do very much notice the jumpers, the sprinters will do a few reps brilliantly for 3 to 5 reps and then put their knees down, have a little break. And then they get back up and do another brilliant 5 reps, put their knees down. Whereas you'll get these endurance athletes, not necessarily with the perfect form, but they will grind it out. Like they will not put their knees down until you say put your knees down. So, there's a bit of a personality thing. Not only is there a obviously physical side of it too, you've almost got to approach them when you are coaching them slightly differently, different personality bases for those sports, which I found quite fascinating and I hadn't considered when I was doing it.
Yeah, that's an interesting insight and makes sense just from physiology alone and their self-selection into their respective events, but definitely fun when you overlay the personality types. Breathing's often a big topic for athletes. Any tips around breathing for Pilates practice?
Yeah, and interestingly, I've done a lot more looking into the breathing patterns since I've picked up mat Pilates. And so having spent sort of the 9 years on the reformer-based things, it was because it is facilitated movement pattern. They were initially designed sort of Second World War for rehab. The movement patterns are very facilitated, and there are Pilates styles that do incorporate the breath work on the reformer. But it wasn't something that we focused on. It was more the quality of the movement and getting the movement done and facilitating the patient to try and get the right muscles. But when you're on the mat, and it has to be something to do with a bit more weight bearing, there is a little bit more energy output because you are having to use a lot more muscle to hold yourselves in these positions. It is a genuinely harder exercise. The breath control has become much more important and something I've really tuned into. And the beauty of it is quite similar to what people would typically put in a gym workout. So it's sort of an inhale breath pattern as you set up the exercise, and then it's the exhale breath pattern as you perform the exercise. That actually sits with people quite well because it's something, I don't know, most people in their lives have done some sort of breathing work, whether it be when you squat, you want to exhale as you rise. It's quite similar in Pilates. The only difference being is when you are doing core work, of course, when you're doing any sort of abdominal crunch and you are curling up, if you try and do the breathing wrong in that position, your actual performance is quite different to if you do it correctly. So an exhale breath as you curl, getting rid of that oxygen from the lungs, creating space to get that movement. And the best way, honestly, to teach someone the breath pattern is to get them to do it wrong a few times and then actually get them to do it correctly. And just pure efficiency will always win. I mean, and the other thing is I have noticed too, even I live right near the tan track here, and there's Alexander Street Hill, which in Melbourne is probably one of the only hills. It's not a very hilly city at all. We're pretty lucky, but you think about what you do on the mat and keeping your breath under control, because you burn on the mat. You really burn those glutes, those core muscles. Like you've got to really take yourself to your happy place and breathe through it. And if you can start to then take that out onto your hill or onto the track and try and tune into that, I do find it is quite a nice functional way of calming yourself down when things start to get a bit rough.
Yeah, that, intuitively makes sense. Inhale to set it up, exhale to execute it.
Yep, exactly.
Alice, what would you say this would be fun, and we're definitely going to need some videos of these, but it's a hard question, so I will give you that. But the top 3 must-do exercises for mat Pilates for every runner, what would they be? I know that's like trying to choose favourite children, but what would be your top 3?
Oh, yeah, no, I've got some good ones. So top 3, first of all, I'm going to have to say classic bread and butter plank. However, I'm going to be fussy with this. It's a specific plank, and my actual gut feeling is for a runner, I actually really love a side plank. Now, runners will hate me for that, but typically runners are quite strong in the sagittal plane of movement. I mean, we do it continuously. Lateral aspect, I find that's when we find our shakes, and we find that, that shoulder support, that oblique support, and then going down into that sort of lateral sling, glute, quad, all the way down the chain is where I think there's always room for improvement. And I think making sure that you're getting that lateral core strength in a side plank would be probably one of my number ones for those athletes. And I mean, side planks are tough, and it doesn't have to be the hardest side plank you've ever done up on your hands. I mean, starting on your knees is a really good place to start, and then a single leg and then a double leg. So there's always progressions, and that's the beauty of the creativity of it. But the side plank would be number 1. The second one would be, of course, a glute exercise. And now specifically glute exercise that I would love would be something quite functional to running. So that would be something in an upright position on a single leg. So I'm kind of killing 2 birds with one stone. I like the single leg stability, but I love the glute, right? So if we can whack those 2 together. So an exercise that comes to mind would be something like a scooter, where you're in a semi-hinged position from the hip standing on one leg, and your back leg is channeling in and out just like you would. So your swing phase, your leg's moving in and out, but your stance leg is doing all of the work. You've got to fire up all of the ankle stabilizers up the chain, but your glute should be the main meal at the top there, really working hard. And then the third one, this is tough. For my runners, I'm going to have to say it's going to have to be a complete posterior chain exercise. And the reason that is, again, we are quite anterior chain dominant. So we tend to be quite tight through the pecs, the shoulders. We are pretty quad dominant sort of athletes. I mean, you get us to do squats, we can do squats. It's fine, no worries. But you get us to do a single leg hamstring bridge, we're going to cramp, we're going to be all over the show. So the way I like to do those is an elevated position. So 2 heels on the edge of your chair. I like it single leg because obviously running is not a double leg sport. Obviously you can start single, but doing some single leg hamstring bridges, and I quite like to alternate the speed. So a little bit of strength power on the way up to get that little bit of fast twitch, and then that slow eccentric control on the way down, maintaining a really level pelvis. You've got your eyes right on your hips. You can see if one's hitching to the left or right, and you can always know which your dominant leg is when you give yourself a set of 10 and, one leg feels like a dream, the other leg feels like it needs a lot more work. So those are probably my top 3. I mean, you really put me against the wall, but I reckon they're the ones that I'd really incorporate into almost every single, Pilates for runners, power workout. They're always things that I think we need to work on.
The so applicable posterior chain exercise, such as some hamstring bridging. Great point, Alice, around varying the speed. I think that's something we often, if we're time poor, we just get locked into. The quicker the better. Let's get it done, get going. But nothing like a bit of time under tension. A glute exercise, like you said, like a scooter. We know the role of gluteal muscles at the back and the side of our hips when we're running, how important they are. And then side planks, you can't go past that. And I definitely echo the same sentiment, Alice, and that's we're good in the frontal plane, in the sagittal front to back plane, but put us transversely or the coronal plane side to side. And that's where we see it in every photo, right, of any athlete for any distance running event. There will start to be a bit of hip dip towards particularly recreational athletes towards the end of that event. And that's where we're trying to ward off some of that fatigue. So brilliant. What would be the top 3 mistakes people make, Alice, around their Pilates practice? Top 3 mistakes. You've shared top 3 exercises, top 3 mistakes.
Number 1, 100%, and particularly with runners, is speed. They approach it like they want to get it done. and so what I tend to do is I've actually gotten rid of reps. I'm like, we're not doing 10 reps, we're not doing 20 reps, we're doing this for time. So like chill out, slow down. We're going to be here for the next 30 seconds. So just get the core. I don't care if you do 5, I don't care if you do 15, but like do it properly. So I'm all about doing it for time as opposed to reps, because I notice in a typical sort of high achieving runner sort of way, get to your 10, what's next? So speed is the very first thing I find people don't do quite correctly. The second thing I would say is, and something that I've worked really hard on, is something as simple as like a plank form. Typically runners don't plank particularly well until they've been cued and trained to plank really well. And I'm super fussy, I must admit. Like I'm a bit of a jerk about it. But I mean, there's a plank and then there's a plank. So learning the basic plank setup with the really correct alignment, so you're not just feeling your shoulders, your legs and your neck, but actually it should be pretty much, 50% of that work should just be in the torso. So that'd be something I'm really passionate about. Once you sort of see those runners go from their original planks and, get a photo of them, 5 weeks later, I mean, it's chalk and cheese, and it's something then I think translate into functional running quite well once they do get the hang of that. And then another mistake is probably, this is more of a, runners typically think Pilates is A for women and B is easy. So that's just a mistake before they've even got to the mat. So that's probably something that precedes any of those things, is actually possibly judging the athleticism of the actual session. And I get a lot of runners that are perhaps have been a bit old school in their ways and their training, and it's not for them, and it's a bit odd, and it's a bit yoga like this, and it's very much not yoga. So there's nothing about this is spiritual. There's nothing about this that is sustained stretches. It's athletic work in a specific way to target a specific outcome. And I always love when I find that I am doing a Pilates class and I get sort of the husband or the boyfriend in the corner off the camera, just having a look. They might look for a few weeks, might be on the couch having a wine, and then after a few weeks you'll find them, they've just started to do a couple of exercises, and then by the end they're doing the full class. So, you can't force them there, but eventually, bit by bit, you kind of reel them in and they go, oh, that was really hard. Why is it so hard? And so it is quite satisfying to know, because I feel like I'm always having to justify it, and I just say, you know what? Like, don't ask questions, just get on your mat, give me 10 minutes and we'll see how we go.
Oh, that's great. And I'll recap on those, starting from the bottom there. Judging the athleticism of a mat Pilates workout could be the third mistake there. The second mistake being plank form, not performing it correctly. And it made me think, Alice, of, and I know this parlays very well into your line of work there, this concept of the Australian Ballet's philosophy that the detail does matter, that form matters, that slowing it down. You can do 50 calf raises quickly, but can you do 20 with really good control? So that was the second mistake. And the first mistake is, ties in there again, speed, going too fast, the classic type A runner, give me 10 reps, what's next? You're listening to Alice Baquie on this expert edition of the Physical Performance Show, Pilates for the Endurance Athlete. Now, recently I caught up with Precision Hydration's co-founder, Andy Blow, to learn about the great work that Precision Hydration have been doing in terms of endurance athletes understanding their 3 levers. That is, how much sodium we lose, how much carbohydrate we need, and how much fluid we need to replenish. Here's a snippet from my recent conversation with Andy Blow.
Yeah, Brad, it's been a great project this last year, because what athletes want to know is how much fluid, how much sodium, how much carbohydrate they need to take in per hour. And we know from all the studies we've done, we know from all the scientific evidence out there that those numbers are quite varied between individuals. So what we've been working hard to do is pull together a bunch of case studies for athletes across a range of endurance sports, triathlon, running, cycling, swimming, to see how much fluid, how much sodium, how much carbohydrate are people taking in per hour, and then how successful they've been in their events. And the idea with these case studies isn't that they're up there for people to copy, but they're to get your head around the numbers that might work for you and to give you a platform to build on. And then in conjunction with the tools that we've got on the website, like the online sweat test, the quick carb calculator, you can dive in and use those tools to get your numbers sorted out and start that trial and error process to see how much, fluid, how much sodium, how much carb is going to work for you when you're out there competing in the summer heat.
For now, let's jump back with this week's Expert Edition featuring Alice Baquie, Australian-based physiotherapist, sharing around Pilates for the endurance athlete and why it matters. Alice, there's been so much great information in this Expert Edition. Every guest of the show gets asked these two set questions. The first being, if you could boil everything you've learned through your own sports history, gymnastics, then endurance running, professional history as a physiotherapist, 9 years with reformers, last several years really deep into the mat Pilates, what would be your top piece of advice or single piece of advice to help listeners of this show perform at their physical best? Alice?
Yeah, that is a tricky one. The ultimate thing that I think every runner or athlete in any regard should do to supplement their training and sort of perform at their best is to always do some form of resistance training, and it does not have to be complex. Simple resistance training as part of your training schedule is an absolute must for me, and I will never go without it. I will never advise any client of mine to not do that, and I think that that is the crux of, and could be the preventative for so many ailments, and also could be the missing link for so much potential and performance.
Yeah, brilliant. So resistance training, but not just resistance training, simple resistance training. And something is always better than nothing. And I think as a society, health-wise, we've all well understood the need for aerobic activity. And there's a great reckoning or awareness, right, around this inclusion of resistance activity. There is not a single person walking the planet that ideally as we age would not be doing resistance exercise. And it can be simple. Alice, every guest of the show issues listeners with a physical challenge for the week. So I have a suspicion this might be something to do with getting on the ground and doing some Pilates at home. But I'm not going to prejudice it. So what is Alice Baquie's physical challenge for the week going to be?
All right. So I thought long and hard about this, and my gut instinct is, so the current world record for the plank is 17 and a half hours, just being in a plank, just doing good form. It's incredible. And so I thought to myself, am I going to give them a plank challenge? No, I'm not, because you know what? That's too hard. And I've just said that exercise should be simple, user-friendly, and it should be able to be done in a normal lifestyle. And so therefore, I'm not going to set that challenge. What I am going to set is, and this is specifically to runners, triathletes, any sort of endurance athlete, is as a trial, and I'm not saying you have to do this every week, but I'd like you to try 10 minutes of activation before your next specifically long run. So even if your long run isn't a super long run at the moment, it might even be just like a 40-minute run, but actually trying before you hit the ground running, take to your mat. There's a little sequence of glute, core, back, a tiny bit of strength activation, and actually see how you pull up after your run, having done that, how you feel during the run, how you feel after. Do it as a scientific experiment. I mean, it's 10 minutes. I actually do mine, no kidding. I've got my coffee there. I've got my band. I do a couple each side. It doesn't have to be fussy, and you can have your kids running around the background, then go for your run and actually see how you perform. It's quite remarkable. It's such a simple thing to do, but it really works, and I'm quite passionate about it, as you can see.
That's brilliant, and certainly overlays with the elite's approach to their workouts. Recreational athletes, competitive, beginners, in between, we're often time poor, and that's part of it, but they rarely just put the shoes on and go for a run, right? There's that pre-thought, and while it might be a difficult thing to scientifically quantify, everyone can agree and acknowledge, Alice, like you just said, that it does something, right? When you spend a few minutes just priming your body, whatever word we want to give it, activating it, it feels different. There's some different thinking about our movement execution.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I'm a big fan, and you could almost argue on that train of thought that you've gone on. It. The elites do have to do that. That is their job. But I mean, the average person might be on their feet all day. Right. So the elites have the opportunity to then go and rest after their training session, recover properly. So all the more reason to set your body up for a good session, if you can do all those little things, knowing that you might have the really flat out rest of your day, if you can do the little things that count, given the fact you may not get that lovely recovery that you'd ideally have in an ideal world. So doing those little things to make yourself easier and recover better and stop injury is really the ultimate goal for most distance athletes.
Great physical challenge, a 10-minute activation workout inclusion before your next long run. And we must tag you in when we do that. We can find you over on Instagram at Alice Baquie, Baquie. But Alice, I must ask you, you had your own injury woes this last circa 12-month period with I believe a torn plantar fascia, 2 surgeries, time in a boot. You've got some brilliant stuff to offer people in a boot, because it's not just a matter of sitting around. There's still plenty that people can be doing, right?
Yeah, and that's and I do have Jen to thank for that too. I think my surgery has really humbled me. I'm someone that's so independent, and as you know, having one foot when you're a runner is a real. It's especially when you're in lockdown in Melbourne with 1 foot. It's pretty bleak, I tell you that. And so it took a determined soul like Jen, who, when she had her injury, she said, look, you've had this foot injury. I know you've been doing these amazing workouts. And we sort of compiled together to then formulate an actual platform for people with foot injuries. And the response to it, I can't believe I hadn't thought of it earlier. I mean, the Achilles, the plantar fascia, the medial tibial stress, and all of those lower limb injuries, particularly in Melbourne, because every second person in Melbourne is now a runner. That sort of lower limb injury just escalated. If you talk to the guys at imaging at Olympic Park, I mean, the amount of stress fractures coming through there was wild, unfortunately. So to still get your glutes, your core, your shoulders, your quads, your hammies without, impacting the healing of your foot, and just for your mental psyche as well. We are like active people, and to sort of be sitting on the couch watching the 17 seasons of Grey's Anatomy is quite soul-destructive. So, I mean, if someone gets some use out of it, and there is a whole lot of sessions there on my platform for them to use at home and, take on the healing journey, I'm stoked to be a part of that.
Alice, you're wonderful, and do check out the gallery. You got some great stuff up on your gallery there. Jen doing some things, you doing some things. So there's always something we can be doing. Alice Baquie, been very generous with your contribution, and thank you for stopping by the Physical Performance Show.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So there you have it, another episode of the Physical Performance Show, and I trust and I know that you enjoyed Alice's sharings today. Now, if you did, jump over and be sure to follow Alice. She's easily found over on Instagram at Alice Baquie, ALICEBAQUIE, and do tag Alice in with your physical challenge attempt for the week. Whilst on social, be sure to follow the show at Physical Performance Show and keep those podsies coming. They are a whole lot of fun. That's a screenshot of the episode that you've been enjoying and tagging in the show at Physical Performance Show. Now, it is annual feedback time for the Physical Performance Show. We want to keep making this show better, but we need to hear from you on how we can improve the show. If you jump over to the bio link on Instagram for the Physical Performance Show at Physical Performance Show as the handle, you'll find the link there for the annual survey. It's brief, but it means a lot if you take the time to let us know what we can do to improve. You can also go into the draw to win a $50 Amazon gift card, with feedback and entries being open right through until the 30th of November. And big thank you to those who are already leaving feedback for us. If you'd like to reach me direct at any point, I'm easily found over on the socials at Brad_beer. Whether that's a physio inquiry, question, or feedback about the show, that is the other means as well. A massive thank you, as always, to the great folk who make this show possible each week. Daryl Misson, our audio engineer, Susan Wilkin on all things show administration, Matthew Alding, graphic design. As we head towards next week's 300th episode, I really want to acknowledge Matt, Susan, and Daryl's efforts in keeping this show going, growing, and improving. So don't forget to jump over and follow Alice Baquie over on Instagram. Check out the great online Pilates mat offerings and get ready for next week's 300th episode. Now, we are going to keep the 300th episode as a little surprise for you. But as we're almost there, I want to say a massive thank you for your support in getting us this far. Get ready for a fun episode next week, episode 300 of the Physical Performance Show. Until then, you know what to do. Keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.